Hello everyone and welcome to my next free tutorial Friday. And this episode I'm going to do a little colorizing and texturing of a traditional media little mech sketch I did in my tone paper sketchbook. It's a little similar to the vehicle one. There are going to be a couple little techniques that are a little different probably, but so I didn't have a lot of time this week. I'm prepping to go for a quick trip to Shanghai next uh, next Friday. So I'm gonna be traveling next Friday. I don't know that I'm gonna get. I'll try to get another one in next week before I leave. Probably have to skip a week when I'm in Shanghai, and then I'll resume when I'm back the week of April 1st. So anyway, for this episode, I've just started with a little. It's a Copic marker sketch that I did in my sketchbook. I have a tone paper Strathmore sketchbook, and I did this in there. And with you see the white around it is a little bit of colored pencil in the background, and a little, probably a couple little touches of white gouache. And all I'm doing here is this is a really fun, fast technique to take your traditional media sketches, add a little color and texture to them, and give them a little bit more life. As opposed to re-rendering the whole thing in Photoshop, I'm just trying to play with a couple of photographic textures. I throw them on I added that on the top there, that sort of metallic rusty texture, and I applied a little layer mask. And now I'm going to blend back over the top, and I just have a multiply layer on top, and I'm starting to drop a couple of areas of that center mechanism into shadow. And you saw I also did a big levels adjustment to the overall piece, and I needed to knock it down a bit, meaning darker, so that when I come back and apply the brights, it'll come back to life. Anyway, also I'd like to thank everybody for helping spread the word about my YouTube channel, and most appreciated. The subscribers have been growing pretty steadily, and it's always fun to see that these tutorials are going out to more and more people, and hopefully helping to improve your work. So still with a little multiply layer, just a big soft airbrush there to get some of the values working a little bit better. And now I'm using I'm going back, sorry, to my top layer there and adjusting my mask. Actually, I think I'm painting on that layer, sorry. Sometimes when I record these and then watch them back over, it's hard to follow all the steps. So I added a layer on top, and it's just a normal layer. It's over the top of everything, and this is kind of what I do with this quick cleanup layer. And I'm actually just color picking out of the background and coming back and cleaning up the silhouette by actually painting over the top. And even though that doesn't have texture, it's close enough to the paper texture, and I'm not painting huge swatches of solid color and value, but it's a really fast way to work. And what's nice is I have my pen set up, so one of the buttons is the option key, and I just color pick from within the painting, so you'll see that it can just stay, really, no interaction. I don't have to use the tool presets at all. So just have the brush and just one click. And my older tutorials that used to have that ring that would pop up, and I finally, thanks to one of you, you told me how to turn that off, so I went and turned it off. So now these newer tutorials, they look a little bit better because that thing doesn't pop up each time. But that's what's happening. That's why I'm picking those colors and values straight from within my painting. So this is a technique, like I said, that I use quite a bit to sort of embellish a traditional media sketch. And I think it's the first like really simple, fun way to get into rendering. So I think it's a good one to share here on my channel, because it's like sort of I think it's the easiest way to get into Photoshop and get some results that are interesting, that you've already done the drawing, so you don't have to worry about, now you're just sort of refining the design, but you don't have to start from scratch. And it's a really fun way to get your feet wet into Photoshop and start embellishing and doing some of the fun sort of image manipulation that Photoshop does. And that's why I'm using layer mask. I'm using texture, photographic texture over the top. I'm using a multiply layer. Soon I'll use a little color dodge. We'll brighten it up, see how that looks. And here I'm just using a small brush and painting little small details back into it. One of the things I see when I look at a lot of digital art is people forget to use, like, work at high enough resolution, and then use some really small brushes, because one of the things that I like about traditional media work is if you have a pen sketch or a pencil sketch, a lot of times you have really nice super fine lines. And a lot of times when people jump into Photoshop and use big custom brushes and work a little faster, maybe, is you forget to go back and add some of those elements. So I think it's nice to have some work high enough res so that when you use a small brush, you can get some little small edges and lines showing up. Um, okay, so I just made a little selection, and I did a copy merged and then paste at the top. So it takes a snapshot of everything below, and then I pasted it back on top of everything. And I'm just going to the hue and saturation menu and moving around the sliders for hue and saturation to try and find a color that I like. And ultimately for this demo, I didn't, I'm actually not crazy with this colors that I chose, but educationally it's the same steps. It's just I'm not personally not crazy with the color palette. But so in this case, I'm imagining that this is either painted blue, um, and as I get further into some more colors, we'll see. Um, some, I'm a little undecided on it. Is it paint? Is it alloy? Right? Is it raw metal or is it painted? I go back and forth a bit on that. And also with the texture and the color I put onto the sketch, is it just there to make the sketch have more color, or is it actually painted brown? So is it actually this kind of golden brown paint, or is the raw metal actually sort of rusty and like it's bronze or something? Ultimately, it's a bit ambiguous, and I don't think I ultimately decided which way to go. So this could either be blue paint or it could be like a cool, um, raw alloy or something. Ultimately, I don't go far enough with the rendering to come back and add rust and streaks and decide what's paint and what's alloy. So hopefully that makes sense, and you'll see it make more sense as I get further along. Um, so a new layer on top, and I'm making this color dodge layer, which you've seen me do before in some of the, if you watched my other tutorials. I double clicked the layer, and that menu came up, and if you slow it down there and see what I'm clicking on and off, I turned off the two boxes that were checked for the layer compositing style, so that it will affect all the layers below. If you don't turn those off, it would just be like painting this white on top, and you won't get it to affect any of the pixels on the lower layers. So this is nice because you can have color dodge on top. You can go over the top like I am here and pushing probably too far. You can erase that back. You can also turn down the opacity of it. So it's a really great way to introduce light into your pieces, which is very much a non-traditional way of working because it's really a Photoshop image manipulation technique as opposed to what you would do with gouache or acrylic. It's not, because you're not painting those pixels, you're just getting things to glow. But it's nice because the temperature changes as you warm it up towards yellow, so you get a little bit of temperature shift, which is nice. And all I'm doing here is just thinking about where the light is to the upper left in this case, and where my line of sight would bounce off towards it, and that's where I go back and put a little bit of specular highlight, a little reflective highlight across these surfaces. And it's a bit strong, but if you want it to look metallic, that's a quick and dirty way to make it look metallic. Um, and in this case, that's sort of the intent. I want that metallic glow to it. And you can see I just, on that color dodge layer, I just grabbed my eraser for a moment just to knock it back. So you have full control over that, which is nice. And now I'm going to add a little bit more light. Right, if I have that strong light landing on my object, it continues down. After it strikes the object, it should continue down and eventually land on the ground. So I'm just brightening up the ground plane a bit. Like I said, these are really fun to do because you've got the design there. You've sort of laid out your perspective. I mean, even this is a very loose sketch, but it's all there, and so you can really just think about color palette. You can think about texture, and it's fun to be able to do that and not worry so much about the design happening or the drawing happening. Those things have been already finished, so you can just really get into the illustration part of it. And now here I'm brightening the background a bit. Just a layer on top. And since this is all on one layer, my sketch at the bottom, I don't have layers set up, so I can't paint behind it. So what I'm doing is I'm painting across the top of it, and then I'm just set up a layer mask. And now you'll see I'm painting into my layer mask, which is effectively erasing the silhouette. Um, so that's all I'm doing, and trying to get that to go behind there. I just wanted to push the silhouette a bit. And so one way to do that, of course, in a classic illustration technique is to stack dark against light or light against dark. And in this case, my object was fairly dark, and so I needed to lighten the background, and that'll make that midsection show up a bit more. And here I'm adding a little bit more reflected light bouncing up from the ground plane. And that's, again, it's on its own layer at the very top. So it's kind of like my cleanup layer. And it's just a normal airbrush. And I'm really just taking the background color and the ground color and bringing it up into those surfaces. And where I might have a little Fresnel effect, I add a little bit of the background color as the shape gets a little brighter, a little shinier around the silhouette. So there's a little bit more of that. And you can see the silhouette then gets softened because you knock it down with that little bit of that effect as that line of sight becomes tangent and it becomes, shinier and more a part of the background. That also helps to integrate your object and put it into an environment. So when I do this, a lot of times hide the palette and have a look, and typically I flip it left, right, my image. In this case, I don't think I did it. It was sort of a really quick example. This is a nice way to add painted graphics. So I'm just grabbing the lasso tool, making a selection, and I did a Command Shift C, Command V. So I did a copy merged, which took a snapshot of everything below. I put it on its own layer on top, and now I'm just playing with hue and saturation, color balance a little bit, and I'm considering these red stripes being painted on the surface. And I'm going to go back and just erase where I don't want them. But see what's nice, they already have all the texture. They already have, the feeling of the traditional sketch is still there. The lines are all still there. And I didn't have to paint over the top of that. Because as soon as you start painting over the top, you start to lose the feel that this is, you lose all that free texture and grit and grime in your sketch. So these are much better to sort of select out with a lasso and then erase. And so I'm thinking that paint is worn off a bit. So here I'm just erasing the edges. And that I'm using a layer mask for, because if I go and mess it up, I can just repaint it and I'll be back to the original silhouette of the stripe. And now I've just added a levels adjustment layer over the top. And I'm thinking that now maybe this golden color is actually paint. And so what I did is it's very similar to that sci-fi hot rod that I did, but on a different subject now. And so you can see I'm going back in with my levels adjustment, and I have a layer mask there. And I did Command I inverted it, so it was doing nothing. And now I'm just painting white with a little textured hard edge brush back into it. And in this case, I'm saying that the base metal is brighter, or it could be primer, it could be something underneath. And here I'm also now shifting hue saturation. So I copied my layer mask that I just did for the levels. I just duplicated it by holding down Option and replacing it and pulling it up to the above layer. And then I got the exact same matching pattern. So I was able to adjust the levels of my scratched off paint or my base metal underneath, and I was able to shift the hue and saturation. And now I've added a little bit of haze and atmosphere above, just with a little quick gradation. That layer is set to screen, just so some of my texture shows back through. I don't want it to be so opaque. And I just have a brush. In this case, it's a sort of a smallish airbrush. And we're closing in on the end of this one. Looks like I've got about 2 minutes left. And it's now this is when I do the big global shifts. All the small stuff's basically done. It's working okay. Like I said, I'm not crazy about the color palette. Here I'm playing with it, still struggling with it. So I'm doing some big global shifts. And you can see it's on a layer on the very top. I just did a Command Shift merge of everything. So my entire rendering now is on one layer. and I'm shifting all the colors, saturation and hue, to see if there's something that I like better. And I'm going to play a little bit with color balance. Color balance allows you to adjust the colors independently in the shadows, midtones, and highlights. So if you here, I picked the shadows and I was making them cooler. And I'm clicking that on and off and deciding which one I want to go with. Do I want the warm one that looks a bit, artificial and glowing a bit too strong, or do I want to go with the one that has a bit lower saturation? Ultimately, I think I'm keeping this one, and now I want to add some. I always like to add atmosphere, not just atmosphere behind the object, but that this thing could really be in an environment. So I'm putting in some specks and some blowing texture, and then I'm going to motion blur it. And so I've added a bit of dust and debris flying through there, and I motion blurred it left, right, and now I'm going to do a little warp on it. So the wind is swirling a bit, and then you can get those little, specks of dust and thing going in slightly different directions, and going at slightly different speeds, so you can get that working and get a much more natural feel. And sometimes even like to take and put a texture over the entire illustration, especially if you have doing a little bit too much Photoshop work on it and things start to get too clean looking and you're losing your traditional media feel. So I just took my original texture, threw it on top, and I'm just cycling now through the compositing methods and see if there's something that I like on top. So here I've got it set to linear light, doubling that up, and I'm doing a little motion blur on that and seeing if I want to put some streaks horizontally across it, add a layer mask, and then you can start to take that out. So maybe I'm just adding a bit of texture, experimenting to see if that works. So we're almost done. We're into our last like half minute. So that quick one this week. I'm pretty swamped, really trying hard to finish the How to Draw book and prepping for my trip to Shanghai next week, as well as a lecture at Long Beach State. I'll be down there next Thursday evening. So if you're local, maybe coming out, I'm going to do a little presentation, I think from 7 to 9:30. But I hope you still enjoyed this one. It's a little bit like the Sci-Fi Hot Rod, just a little different subject matter, different color palette, slightly different textures, a couple little tweaks to the techniques. But one of my favorite things to do with my sketches to jazz them up a bit. So hope you'd enjoyed it, and check in next week.